Everybody, this is episode 6 of The Grief of Politics. I am Joseph Carlson. I'm here with Avin Carroll. Hey, Avin.
Hey, Joe. How's it going?
Go ahead and drink your drink. I saw you were about to drink. Yeah, there we go. So yeah, like we said last month, this month we're going to talk about the international or global chip shortage, however you want to look at it. We picked 3 articles like we normally do. It was my turn to pick. Avin is in IT, so he knows a little bit about this, but he did peruse the articles. We will be bringing them up and talk about them like we normally do. Let's just go with the overall thoughts about the chip shortage before we dive into the articles. So, Avin, what are your overall thoughts about the chip shortage?
Well, I mean, one of the articles here actually kind of describes it as the perfect storm, and in a lot of ways it really was. The kind of forecast for vehicle production in the United States, because they really focus a lot on vehicle production more so than anything, although it impacts many areas, were really low because of the pandemic. And of course, the way we do manufacturing in the world nowadays is with on-demand inventory. So, companies budget and plan to have their parts, their parts, whatever they're going to be putting into their product, like at the very last second possible, so that they don't have to have inventory in stock using up space that it potentially could be going bad, getting old, whatever else it may be. So you have that like on-demand manufacturing with a reduced manufacturing expectation with COVID. With car manufacturing, you have a thing that actually wasn't discussed in any of these articles, but was a really big impact in the rental vehicle industry, because when the pandemic started, no one really knew what was going to happen. And with the like massive loss in travel and leisure, most of the rental car companies sold off their fleets. Yeah, and now they need to rebuy. So this is a huge, huge deal. Oh, yeah. Lisa and I were looking to go visit family in Idaho for the 4th of July weekend. Well, we are going to, but we aren't renting a car because in Boise, Idaho, it was $160 a day for the cheapest vehicle we could find.
That's bad.
The next cheapest was $161, and it was a Ford Transit van.
Oh, I use those for work. They're great.
Yeah, from there it went up like...
They get good mileage, the Ford Transit. I mean,
crazy.
I can speak from experience.
So now the rental car industry has this huge demand. They need vehicles, and so they're trying to buy cars. The car manufacturers are behind on manufacturing because they don't have all of the various microprocessors, chips that they need for it. You've got all of the tech companies growing like crazy. There's been massive demand on video cards for a super long time because of crypto mining.
Oh, yeah. Did you hear, just as an aside, that NVIDIA said in their, I think their 3080 or their 3090, maybe it's both, they changed some of the internals or something so it would make it more difficult for crypto miners. They did some
I thought
weird...
they had blocked it.
Yeah, maybe that's what it was. They I mean, obviously, people are, where there's a will, there's a way. They will figure out a way around it. But they said they tried to make it more difficult, or at least freeze that out of the 3080 and 3090 cards, because not only is there a chip shortage and so they're not producing as many, but all the crypto people are, scooping them up. If it's not a scalper, it's a crypto guy, girl, crypto person. Anyway, which I don't understand. I want, that might be just an aside with you and, your our friends and stuff that are in IT, where I might buy a couple of beers and then someone explained to me, like an infant, how someone with a video card can make currency, or just be like, listen, I am a big dum-dum. Why are people buying my ray tracing video card to make Dogecoin or whatever they're doing? Explain to me like I'm 12. Not even 12. That might be too much. Like grade schooler. Anyway, back to the chip shortage. So, yeah, I mean,
And on top of that, with COVID, you ended up stacking on another item. So car manufacturers cut back their demand. The actual chip manufacturers cut back their work, and there's lead time in manufacturing with everything. And then you have massive demand for computers and personal home electronics because everyone came home.
Phones, consoles.
Yeah. Well, PCs, like laptops. I've been working a project with a local company, a very large kind of local company, just enabling their workforce to work from home. And we've been buying laptops by the hundreds. Which over the course of the year, they've bought thousands of laptops to get their workforce working from home, to set up their workforce for permanent work from home. Because initially it was like, oh, this will be temporary. And now they're making huge pivots in how many people are going to work from home and stay working from home, just like many companies are doing. And we're small potatoes compared to some of the larger corporations that are making this pivot. I mean, we had massive issues getting monitors because people were buying monitors like crazy.
I mean, I never thought of that. Like, I just had a big thing. I think we talked about it a couple episodes ago, but like, I cover gaming and stuff like that, and reading about gaming news. It is cool that the companies now, I think like Capcom and Square Enix were like, hey, if you guys want to work from home, you can work from home. Mm-hmm. We figured out but then that's a logistical thing of like, do we have enough laptops and stuff to send to people? Like, I know when this started, the webcams was maybe a chip thing, but just a shortage of actual cameras, of webcams, because luckily I got mine a while ago and was able to get another one, like kind of not post pandemic, but like we were coming out of it. And I mean, it's everything. Yeah. And it's one of the things I want to bring up in the articles we'll talk about later. It is shocking. And I actually had a discussion with a friend of ours about this, that we talked about it. And it's really troubling. So I kind of echo your thoughts. I don't have any big over thoughts. I mean, everything you're saying is correct. And definitely reading this article, there's just one thing I want to bring out. So maybe we should just get to the articles because I don't want to rehash everything you said because I agree with you. I don't, and I want to say, like, you being conservative, me being a liberal hippie, this affects the world. This isn't a partisan thing. And that's why I brought the last article is actually like the Senate approved money to do this. And I think no matter where you fall in conservative, we need to watch our money. We can't spend taxes. This is just how the world is moving, and that's one of the points I want to bring up later. But we'll get into this. The first one, I wanted to do one for each industry, but we try to cap it at 3 articles. So the first one, obviously, is they talk about, it's from, NBC News. It was written by Paul A. Eisenstein on January 14th, 2021. And he just talks about basically car manufacturers and how just this intro paragraph kind of sets up the whole thing. The Ford plant in Louisville, Kentucky, along with its 39,000 employees, 3,900 employees. Yeah, it's the morning.
Yes.
3,900 employees stand idle this week after the automaker was forced to Yeah, I know, I need an energy drink. After the automaker was forced to temporarily halt production due to shortages of critical microprocessors and other computer chips. So they said it's happening everywhere. Chrysler in Ontario, Subaru in Japan, and General Motors, Honda, Renault, Toyota, and Volkswagen are all feeling the impact of this, and they're closing down, and they're trying to look for more and more chips. So yeah, it's one thing when it'll come out later, but they just have to shut everything down, So this is one of the reasons why the economy is I think this is where the economy is going to have a problem of coming back up because we just can't produce this stuff. As a quick aside, that ship that tried to go through the canal and got stuck, they said that was part of a much bigger problem of like, now that everything's ramping up, everybody's running out of everything.
Yep. Well, and so that's the whole thing, right? Like we just globally stopped production of so much stuff, so many things. I have a friend that works in a support industry for construction, and his company sells products to the construction companies directly, wholesale, and their manufacturers are like all over the world for the different products that they rep. But like they ran into a massive issue as people started returning to work. where their plants had been shut down for so long that even when people started coming back to work, they weren't coming back in full force because we're doing limited work, right? Like 25%, 50% was allowed in the space. They're socially distanced. But demand is still there. Like demand for these products is still super, super high. So now you've got this pent up backlog of demand that has to be caught up, that's being caught up at a slower rate than it was going beforehand. Like we've got a full year of pent up demand. This is going to be dragged out for a long time. I think that's part of the reason that I think we will see a pretty huge improvement in spending. We'll see a lot of money going out into the world because it's going to take us a long time to get caught up. But on top of that, even when they bring back full workforces and even when everyone's fully back to work, it takes time to make these things. Like one of the, was it this article where they talk about like it used to be like a 18-week lead time and now it's as high as 36 weeks. It's later down in the article, I think. Maybe it's not this one. I think it's the other, the article from the Nikkei.
Yeah, they said not only is the, like you said, the labor at the end of this article, they said it's the chain disruption. So it's the chip shortage, but it's like the people that make the chips they don't have this or they don't have that. And so then they can't make the chips, then they can't give it
every
to the next
subpart,
step.
every raw material manufacturer, like all of it is behind. And then we're already in a spiking demand phase, not even with COVID, because of advancing technology. I think this is a big reason why, and that none of the articles address this, but I follow Tesla a little more closely than I follow a lot of other stuff. And that's one of the reasons they make their own chip. One of the reasons they make their own chip.
Yeah. I mean, we'll probably talk about that because I want to that's the last thing I want to talk about is like the overarching thing. But yeah, I mean, this article really does the numbers of like, hey, this is going to be a problem. This plant got shut down and this. And they talk to the people there that are like, this is just how it is now. I know consoles, a lot of PR people and spokesmen for like PlayStation have said, hey, this shortage is going to go on through 2022. We're not going to be able to produce consoles. The funny thing about the PlayStation, though, was it broke a bunch of records. The PlayStation 5 broke a bunch of records for sales, but they were pretty much selling out of what they had, And now there's talk that the Switch might be upgrading, making an upgraded model, the Nintendo Switch, but then people are like, well, where are you going to make these chips, And then Nintendo's like, well, we're making, I think they're a generation behind. So their thing is like, we will be able to produce these chips because we're a little bit behind where everybody else is. So it doesn't require as many components, but
they're not bleeding edge on the technology.
Yeah. So let's go to this second article. And this is the one that I wanted to bring up. It's from the Nikkei Asia.com, which actually I've seen this before, but I definitely want to probably bookmark these people and read more because they do a lot of nuts and bolts things, but it's really interesting. And this article was written by, holy crap, like Qiuhua, He, Shijia, and Xiaohu, Liu Yukun, and Han Wei. And it was written on June 1st, 2021, so not that long ago. And it's titled, like you said, How a Perfect Storm Created the Global Chip Shortage. They talk about what goes into it, how the landscape is being reshaped because of it. But there was one stat in here that when I originally thought of this as a topic, I've been thinking about it for a while because obviously it's hit the news a bunch. There was a Bloomberg article, I believe. I wish I would have saved it again. It kind of laid out the numbers of who produces what and where they are and why we're behind. But this article just has one paragraph that I think talks to the problem of why this is happening. It says, according to the Boston Consulting Group, America chip makers' share of the global production capacity declined from 37% in 1990 to 12% in 2020. While those in Europe fell from 44% in 1990 to 9% in 2020. Right. Meanwhile, Taiwan, South Korea have grown. In the first quarter, Taiwanese enterprises accounted for 4 of the world's top 10 wafer manufacturers, seizing 66% of the market, while South Korea's 2 biggest wafer makers took 19%. The 2 largest chip makers on the Chinese mainland, Semiconductor Manufacturing International Group and Huhong, Semiconductor accounted for a combined 6%. Taiwan's TSMC and South Korea's Samsung Electronic currently have the most advanced technologies to produce 7-nanometer chips, while Intel is still producing its 7-nanometer processor. Chinese chip makers are capable of blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so basically that first paragraph to me is the problem, is the fact that we only produce 12% of the chips in the world, meaning that we are dependent on Asia to have these things shipped to us. And I think when I talk to conservative people and friends, and especially when you talk about taxes and where money is going, and we'll bring in the last article later, but this idea that, where's this money going to? It's like, we need to stop thinking about this as money. All the time you hear conservatives talking about we need to be less reliant on foreign influence. Uh-huh. This is one of those things that people aren't talking about, which is an example of foreign influence. The fact that we only produce 12% of the chips that we're using. You know what I mean? Like, how are we going to compete with the world, basically? And, what happens now that there is a supply problem? Couldn't they just raise the price? And what are we to do if they say, these chips are just going to cost more? Does that mean? Well,
they talked about it for the automotive industry, is like it's going to increase costs worldwide on chips. Mm-hmm. I was surprised that they projected only like 3% cost increase, but
I mean that's a projection, right? So I guess when the metal meets the road, they'll be like, "Ooh, it was actually about 6%. We're sorry, we're projecting this. We don't really know for sure."
Yeah.
But this is one thing I really get mad when people talk about. They just talk about this as a monetary thing, of like, well, we're spending all this money. What is it getting us? And it's like, you can't look at it like that. You have to look at it as like, you don't want us to be reliant. You got to spend some money. And this is just going to keep happening unless we start producing stuff. You know what I mean? Like
Well, it goes a lot deeper than that, right? Like there's a bunch of reasons why we've moved manufacturing overseas.
It's cheaper. It's much cheaper. We pay $600 for an iPhone, and we don't want to pay any more.
Where are you getting a $600 iPhone? Like base?
No, but I when I sign my contract, you pay on your phone, right? So
I know. I'm giving a hard time, right? Because prices are just going up and up and up as technology.
You're like, where'd you get that? I'll give you the store. Yeah.
There's a whole bunch that goes into it, right? Like you said, it's cheaper to manufacture over there. And there's a whole bunch of policy issues that make it cheaper to go over there.
They did bring that. As a quick aside, I didn't bring it up, but there was a link to the sanctions that Trump started against Asia, China specifically, and that made it more difficult to import chips. And I didn't want to bring that in because it was another article and it linked me to like another page. But I do remember hearing the murmurs of that when he started those sanctions up, of people going, hey, hang on, hold on.
Mind you, that's China, not Taiwan. And the vast majority of these chips are manufactured in Taiwan.
But this was an Asian article that said this did impact. Like it was meant to impact China, but it was a broad swath of like it all.
Well, because what happens in China impacts the whole region.
Yeah.
Right? Plus, lower level manufacturers of base components and material, like it all feeds in, right? So part of it's a policy thing. Part of it is just American labor is really expensive. Mm-hmm. Part of it's tax code because
some of it is, I think, in this country we're addicted to cheap stuff. We like cheap stuff.
And part of it, where I was going, is part of it is the American consumer, right? Like we want better for the same price or lower than what we already paid for it.
Right.
And surprisingly, even though everything is getting more expensive, there is inflation. Like right now, we're all talking about hyperinflation, being concerned about that. There will always be inflation in the world. Like we need it. It is a necessary part of an economy. So things get more expensive. Wages have essentially stagnated when you factor in inflation. Mm-hmm. And yet we're getting newer, better, faster electronics just constantly, and we've kind of become addicted to it. I mean, there's been so many different articles about the waste involved in just our cell phones.
Oh, like e-waste, yeah.
Yeah, and how it used to be we did our phones every 2 years. Now we're frequently doing it every year because there's this new cycle. Do you need to have the newest? Do you need to have the greatest? There's like this whole debate around that. And when it comes down to it, like American consumers want the cheapest that they can possibly get it. And the companies that sell.
It's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Like
Yeah.
we want and are addicted to cheap things. But the thing is, like you just brought up, like, and we were talking before we recorded, my company hasn't given anybody a raise in 2 years. And there's a lot of companies out there like that. So you're stuck in a position because I'm on a job site now and I'm making more money. So part of me is like, oh yeah, I'll get this and I'll get that because I'm making a little bit more money. But like there's a lot of consumers out there that they can't do that,
Exactly.
And so I've read, this is all anecdotally, I have no evidence, but we should just pay more for things. But because we're addicted to it and the fact that we are not getting paid more, so we can't really literally pay it forward of like, well, I'm making a little money, I'll pay this. We're in this weird thing where it's like, what do you mean we have to import them from Asia? Like you said, American workers should get paid more, And I think if we were to build factories, again, this isn't conservative or liberal, whatever. This is how the world works now. This is just how it is. We need to build a factory here. So if we start producing, that could drive up, qualified people to build this stuff. And there's no import tax. There's none of that. But we have to be prepared for it. It's this whole cobbled up thing of like, we need to pay people more, and then we need to expect to pay more for things. Like food, I've heard anecdotally that we should all be paying about 30% more for food, but we don't, just the way the food service industry works. Again, addicted to be able to go to McDonald's and get something for $20 as opposed to go to a sit-down restaurant and, it's... To me, this is the crux of the argument that really, again, upsets me when you talk to conservatives, when they talk about tax hikes and things like that. It's like, no, you listen, I'm here to, I'm going to be your sponsor. Imagine this is addiction and I'm your sponsor. I'm going to you need to get off it. You need to think about this differently than you're thinking about it now. This isn't about raising someone's taxes and it going to a waste. This is about us building a factory and thinking about things in the future.
Like the government raising taxes isn't going to build a factory. Businesses like Intel and AMD and even maybe TSMC need to be incentivized to build their factories
here. Which is the last article we'll get into, but
so government taxing on that isn't what's going to impact it. It's tariffs, which you've talked about, like international trade taxes. It's internal, corporate tax policy and how that works. And then labor costs. Labor costs are just really high. And the reality of it is, just like China has the most skilled, tool and die industry in the world, and they can scale and manufacture better than basically anyone at the moment because they do it for everyone. Taiwan and South Korea have the most experienced, most talented team of, chip development and chip manufacturing. We need to be investing into that for the future, as well as manufacturing. You can poach for a while, but that gets expensive, right? You can poach those people over. The interesting part of it for me, because this is a political podcast, and from a political perspective, I find it heartening. Everyone believes we need to get more manufacturing in the United States so that have less dependence. It's great. Everyone believes that should be the case, but there's two very different philosophies on that, right? There's now the stereotypical gerbs side of it.
Oh yeah.
And there is the stereotypical corporate greed is crushing our economy side of it, which there's a balance in between it. And actually, I don't know if there's any balance to, but there's definitely a balance of corporate greed is destroying our national security.
Are you talking about our next episode? No. That could be our next episode. I think reading these articles kind of gave me a little... Actually, I didn't include it this time, but it gave me a little bit of an insight into you can only, when these things are produced, it's on an automated line because they have to be dust free. They're in cartridges. I think one person. There's I didn't include it, but I believe it is Bloomberg. Somebody did here's how you make a chip, and they had a video. And yeah, I mean, again, you can charge whatever you want for the chips, but the idea is you can't speed the lineup. I don't think it doesn't seem like, and to me, that's perfect. It's like, listen, guys, again, last episode we were talking about the tax thing. Trades really need to be focused on, and maybe all these people that maybe have an inkling to do this stuff, maybe we do waive fees for people to enter the trades because we want to start being competitive again. Or like, hey, this is a $10,000 course for you to be certified to produce these chips. We have a program, like almost a scholarship program that like the government is going to give away these scholarships because we need people to build these factories. By the time you're out of school, we'll have these initial factories built, stuff like that. Like this stuff needs to be focused on. And I just think, again, I don't like getting in fights. I hate to say it, it's mostly conservatives about like, we've talked about before, your tax money might not go in the right place and all this stuff. But the last article, actually, we should probably bring it up now because we keep talking about the government. This is written by The Verge. It was written by McKenna Kelly on June 8th, 2021. Or at least it hit the web. It was published then. It's called "The Senate Approves Billions for U.S. Semiconductor Manufacturing." It's part of Chuck Schumer's bill called the Endless Frontier Act. The Endless Frontier Act was originally intended to provide about $100 billion in funding for a new science directorate at the National Science Foundation to promote research in emerging tech fields. It would dole out billions to regions all across the country to build out new tech hubs and encourage tech companies to find homes outside of Silicon Valley and the coast, which would be great because it would be cheaper to build a factory somewhere than as opposed to like in the Bay Area or in New York. It's really expensive. Biden did the infrastructure package, was kind of tied to that. The original $2 trillion plan contained funding for broadband expansions, roads, highways, and called for $50 billion for domestic semiconductor manufacturing. So yeah, basically it's trying to make places technology hubs, to create new well-paying tech jobs outside of the coast, which is good. And they need, a lot of people said this is great because it's, sending places to other regions that may be underlooked. So I think this is the kind of stuff that needs to happen. So like, I do agree with you, raising taxes doesn't mean that this money will get to the right place. But a bill like this is exactly what this money is for, and this is what you're using it for. I think this is more important than just raising people's taxes.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the purpose of government, right? Like to make the American economy, to create policy and programs and to spend money in areas that make America a more competitive country that provide jobs and provide stability to American people. Like this is the purpose of why it exists. That's why it passed, right? Because and I know right now that Republicans wield enough power that they could have blocked this, but they wanted it to go through too. It looks good. It's just overall like how that implementation works out, right? Like, so it's $50 billion. So how's that going to work? I'm guessing there's going to be grants. There'll probably be massive tax incentives programs if you like meet certain guidelines, like, hey, you build a chip plant in, rural Oklahoma.
It'd probably be, if you think about it from a business standpoint, that's good because you can, the cost of living in Oklahoma is much cheaper than, again, the Bay Area. So you can,
your land, right?
Yeah, and you can make the proposal like, hey, we got power and water and utilities, and it's way cheaper, so like build it here.
But there's disadvantages too, like supply chain management. It's really difficult to get your parts in
Oklahoma,
the finished product out. What about electricity? What about internet? Like, so there's other factors that go into that besides like, hey, my labor is cheap and my land is cheap. But now I'm going to spend all this extra money trucking everything into me. That's why a lot of these companies are built on the coasts, because so much of it is still like subcomponents and
they can put it in a
raw
container
material.
and ship it somewhere. Yeah, that's
Exactly. And it's right there in the ports. So
yeah, it would have Texas would be a good place, I would think.
Yeah.
Shows how much I know about geography.
Except
Maybe Florida.
Except, with Texas, you have the maybe less reliable power grid thing going on right now.
Oh, right. Well, they would have to beef that up. But yeah, maybe that's where the infrastructure money is going to.
A lot of companies are headed to Texas right now, though, because Texas has an extremely business-friendly tax code. Yeah, they'd rather have the people there working as opposed to taxing the businesses.
Are we actually going to do an episode on Texas? Because, again, it fascinates me. Texas completely fascinates me with its...
Texas-ness?
Yeah, no, it does. It's like, hey, we're doing things our own way. Oh, we kind of messed up. Yeah, you did. Oh, darn. Like, I don't know. It's really... It's fascinating.
It is an example of free market capitalism and how it can go bad and how it can go good. Like...
Yes.
That one of the strongest, most reliable, most stable economies in the country, combined with, like, we're using the power grid as an example, some real-life, painful examples of what happens when things are in the free market.
It reminds me of that episode of The Simpsons when Homer had the flood in his basement and the plumber was there. And the guy said, oh, the leak was really easy to fix. It's really just like some 50-cent washers. I have some in my car. And Texas is Homer with a shotgun going, looking at Bart going, get my gun. And the guy just leaves. Like, it's, hey, man, it would just take a little bit to, like, weatherproof these things. And they're like, man, we're not going to do that.
Well, I mean, the businesses did that because they're on their own private grid and there's very little government regulation in it. They've learned their lesson. And, like, one of the big things that came out of it, the Texas governor banned and shut down all of the wholesale electric companies, because in Texas the electric companies lease the lines, and so like when you own a home in Texas and you're paying for electricity, you get to pick your company. So there's like a bunch of different electrical companies and you pick who you buy your electricity from, and there was 2 or 3 of them that sold you electricity at wholesale, and so it could be super cheap, and in fact at sometimes they actually would pay you to use electricity. I was talking to my friends when we were down there for my birthday in Dallas. And so like the electrical company would legitimately pay you like 6-7 cents a kilowatt hour to use your electricity at super low demand periods, because they still have to get, like, the electricity still has to be out there. But on the flip side of it, it's regulated what the maximum they can charge you per kilowatt hour was like capped, but it was capped at like $9 a kilowatt hour, which is why some of these people during that big had thousands of dollars. And it's set up on auto payment, so it automatically bills you like every week or every 2 weeks, which is why you saw people like shut off your card, block your card, remove your card from your account, because people were getting their bank accounts wiped out. The power would come up, it'd be up for 2 or 3 hours, their heat would be on full blast, and then their bank account would get wiped out. So like Texas learned a lesson, and they went out and they were like, okay, we're not going to do this wholesale thing anymore, because OMG, it hurts so many people.
Did they listen?
I don't know. Yeah, we're totally off into the weeds here.
No, my thing is, this would be the kind of thing that with the bill for infrastructure and also the semiconductor thing of like, hey, now everybody made fun of the Amazon videos, because remember Amazon was like, we want to open up a new factory or a new headquarters. And I don't know if you saw online last week, Tonight did a thing about it. A lot of cities and stuff like that did videos of, come to our city, come to DC, come to Cleveland. I wonder if that's going to be the kind of stuff that's going to come to maybe some kind of federal agency of like, hey, in Columbus, Ohio, we really want to build an Intel, a chip factory, and I want to see those of like, and I do think the places out of the norm, like we were talking Oklahoma and stuff, that's all just good stuff that can be handled, the shipping and all that stuff of how to get the raw goods in there. But I think what like I said before, what people need to understand is, if we're producing stuff in America, it's going to cost more because of price of labor, and we're going to have to come to terms with, okay, well, I'm just going to have to pay more for my iPhone. You know, like for me, the metal hits the road when, like, say you're now. This is a weird situation, so I mean, this would be the moment I think where a lot of people would realize. So let's say you go to Best Buy and you want to get the new iPhone 20. I'm just rounding up to make this easy. So you want to get the iPhone 20, and you go up there, and they're like, I mean, I think we've kind of all done this. The clerk or whatever is like, hey, we don't have the iPhone 20, or we have the iPhone 20, but this one is $600 and this one is $300. The thing with the $300 one is you'll have to wait 3 weeks because they're short. This is coming from Asia. The one that's $600 you can get right now. I got it in the back, but it's just a contract thing we'd have to sign with you. You know, I think a lot of people are like, oh. So I'm paying more, but I'm getting it right now as opposed to waiting. Now, some people, just like everybody in our lives, sometimes I'm like, no, I'm going to wait. There's no way I'm paying that. Some people will be like, hey, for work, whatever, I need this one now. My phone's dead. Or, hey, I just want the newest thing right now. And I think that would prove to people like, this one's being produced in America. It's more. So you're paying for the labor and the stuff that goes into that phone. So you can have it now, just like a convenience store. Or you could wait a couple weeks and get the one from Asia. And then at that point, I think that would be a way to show people, hey, this is how this works. So you pay more now and you get it. Or you wait and you get it a little bit later. And I don't know.
I don't know that it would be that that exact example. Because if you're thinking about supply chain management and you're going through it in the chip manufacturing process, like whoever's making the chips here in the United States isn't going to be making them for cell phones. Like, because Apple manufactures their phones overseas. So they're not going to build a chip here, then put it on a boat and ship it to China to be manufactured at Foxconn and then shipped back, right? But like automakers, Ford, Chrysler, Volkswagen, people that have factories in the United States, like they're going to do it.
I was using an example of the phone.
Well, and the reason I bring that up is because it's not the end user so much that's going to see it. And we're kind of sold this bill of goods that it's the end user. And the reason it all went overseas, like the reason that Intel even shut down making their chips and started licensing out all of their chips is because the manufacturers are, well, I can get this chip made for 10 cents a chip cheaper overseas. And that 10 cents per chip over 100,000 chips is a ton of money for us, or a billion chips, right? Whatever it may be. So,
yeah.
The consumer at the end isn't going to see that big of an impact in a car when, you know, the chip costs the car manufacturer an extra $4 per car.
Yeah. No, I mean,
over
that makes sense.
Tens of thousands of cars, that's a lot of money, but I mean, really, does it work out? Like the whole argument of, you know, you can't raise minimum wage to $15 an hour because the cost of a burger at McDonald's is going to go up too much. Well, that's bogus. McDonald's produces so many burgers that $15 an hour divided out over all those burgers is a very infinitesimally small amount of money.
So let me ask you a question. This is kind of getting, maybe not. What about small business? I've heard that argument too of like, well, you know, small businesses aren't McDonald's. They can't just raise people's minimum wage to whatever because they have fewer employees and stuff like that. Like,
I mean, we're onto a totally different conversation on minimum wage because like small businesses aren't going to be impacted by the chip pricing in the same capacity. Small businesses aren't out there buying chips from TSMC.
Well, TSMC? That's not true. That's not true. Some of these articles, maybe ones I didn't bring in, but they talked about there's smaller companies that are doing repairs on laptops, and they're like people bring them in and say, you know what, can you just fix this laptop? I can't upgrade, you know, and you're like, okay, and then they start getting into it and they're like, oh, this is kind of messed up, so we're gonna have to order parts. Well, then you do that and you're kind of running into the same problem.
So you do run into it, right? Like, so going back to the example of minimum wage at McDonald's, you're completely on the economic side of it. Like, okay, so McDonald's, Costco, Walmart, like they absorb it in dividing the cost out of all of the tens and tens and tens of thousands of people that they serve on a daily basis.
Well, also, to add to your thing, McDonald's, you know, when you go to McDonald's, just like if you go to Starbucks, like I've been to Starbucks in different cities and stuff like that, you're like, that tastes like Starbucks. When I go to McDonald's somewhere else, I'm like, that tastes like McDonald's. Mm-hmm. And I guess my argument to small business, this is my one anecdotal thing, but this proves a point. So my wife and I were in vacationing in Seabrook, beautiful. I was like, hey, let's get some sweaters and stuff while we're here with the Seabrook logo, because we go here a lot, right? And we like sweaters. We're a big fan of pullovers. So I went into one place, and they had the logo. It was a beautiful sweater. It felt really good. It was a zip up with a hoodie. Mm-hmm. And then I looked at the price, and it was $120. Now you think, oh my God, $120. That's a lot for a sweater. Mm-hmm. And I went up to the counter and said, is this price right? And she goes, yes. But here, let me tell you why. This company pays their employees a living wage, and they don't work overtime, stuff like that. It's truly, they care about what they make. They try to use good material, and they pay people what they're worth. I'll tell you this: it's anecdotal, it's one thing, but that's one of the most comfortable sweaters I have. So,
and it brings you existential comfort as well.
Yeah. And so that's what I would say to people who are like, well, small businesses can't keep up with McDonald's. Well, when I go to a mom and shop, like there's a burger place down the street that I go to. Is it the best burger ever? No, but it's amazing. I just love it, right? They don't taste like a McDonald's hamburger. It tastes like a hamburger from, a cheeseburger from that place. I go there because I like their cheeseburgers. I'm paying $15 for a meal, which is about what you cost, but the ones at McDonald's suck. And this one gives you a lot of crinkle fries, which, by the way, top tier fry, crinkle fry, and this amazing burger. And I would rather pay the extra money to get something that I enjoy more than going to McDonald's and get a 20-piece McNugget thing and being in the bathroom the rest of the day.
But we literally just had this conversation about, like, you've got to get the American consumer to make that switch. Now, you already pay more for that. Well, you're probably paying a pretty competitive price, actually, for that nice mom and pop burger, because they're controlling their costs a lot more, because in order to make it. But also, you're probably buying it directly from the owner and their families, because they can't afford to pay a bunch of teenage kids to come in and do it.
Yeah.
But they can basically use their indentured servant children.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Which is not necessarily always the case. I am definitely stereotyping, but there was a burger joint that I loved going to in Texas when I lived in Dallas. I would go by every Saturday. I had this routine that I went through on the weekends, and I would go by, and on my way home, I'd stop off at this place. It was called It's a Burger. It's a Burgers are still in business, but this particular location closed. The owners ran it, and they had like 2 employees that were like local kids, and then the owners. And it was a great burger, and it was competitively priced at McDonald's. I wasn't paying a whole heck of a lot more. But, with COVID restrictions and reduced people coming in and reduced traffic, like, they had to close.
Yeah.
The local McDonald's didn't close because scale of distribution of cost, they can spread it all out, right? But also because people started getting really frugal and they stopped going there, and maybe they transitioned to a dollar menu as opposed to buying the Big Mac.
Yeah, we've talked about before, like, I think that's kind of what the heart of the semiconductor thing. We went on a tangent, but I think it is all tangential to the idea of we need to be conditioned to, it sucks, but we need to be conditioned to pay more. Like, if my wife and I go back to Seabrook, she's worn that sweater. It's like, I know it's like $120, but I want one of those, And it's like, well, if you're helping these people and they get a living wage, yeah, I haven't bought a lot more, you know what I mean? Like, why buy a crappy $20, whatever. Why buy a $20 sweater that's just going to fall apart? And this one's great, and it feels amazing. It's like putting a blanket around it's great. And so it's like,
And there's a whole societal argument that comes around. Like, there's so many tiers in that argument. So if you're looking at the semiconductor aspect of it, and you're looking at the chip manufacturing aspect of it, you look at your small cell phone developers, like, oh man, I can't even think of it. It was the Essential Phone. Andy Rubin, who created Android, left Google, started Essential Phone, designed his own phone. There's a lot of the OnePlus phone line that kind of came up small and that has now grown to being pretty broadly recognized because they make a really good product. But they started off by doing like mid-tier, maybe upper mid-tier manufacturing, but being kind of innovative in how they did it and giving really cool features and stability. It's going to be harder for those companies to compete because of scale.
Right.
When chip prices start going up, right? Because now, like, the benefit that OnePlus had was you got a really, really good phone, but at a very affordable price point. And that's kind of how they broke into the industry. Kind of like the same thing with the early days of, say, Hyundai. When Hyundai came to the United States, they were super, 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 super cheap cars.
Right.
But they could sell a bunch of them at scale, make a bunch of money, and kind of grow into it. The chip manufacturers coming to the United States and manufacturing chips is going to impact that, but there's going to be trade-offs, right? Like there would be benefits because a lot of those maybe smaller one-off people would be kind of incentivized to do some of their manufacturing here in the United States. And I do think Foxconn has started building a plant or has built a plant in the United States because of pressure from Apple. But at the end of the day, I still don't see it being a gigantic impact if the businesses recognize the importance of it. I mean, what else did we learn about important of being manufactured in the United States or in our own country? And I say that because even Europe has learned masks, Q-tips, or like nasal swabs. Like what else did we run out of because we don't make it here anymore?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what this argument comes down to is like we have to decide, we're willing to pay this. And, again, I hate to rip on the conservatives, but this idea that like, well, we're gonna get charged more. It's like, well, this just is how the world works now, But how can we control that and change it? Like, if we start producing stuff here, we'd be less whatever. But then, like you said, with that may come some cost increases, and I think people need to be prepared for that.
I don't think that you're seeing conservatives saying. I think you're unfairly saying that conservatives are the one pushing back, like we're going to pay more, because the general consensus within conservative movements too is that we do want to keep American jobs in America, right? Maybe too much so in a xenophobic fashion, even a bit protectionist, but it's just the different ideas on how to do it. And that kind of becomes the difficult part of it. Like, how do we remain competitive on the world market and keep our jobs here? The reality of it is there are a lot of companies that are helmed by liberal leaning or very liberal supportive executives that still manufacture a lot of their stuff overseas, that still buy a lot of their stuff from overseas. And I would point out Tim Cook and Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos is definitely a capitalist, and he will defend capitalist ideals, but he also has a tendency to lean more towards liberal policy and ideology. Except taxes. Don't take his money.
Yeah, that's... No, I don't know. I think you and I just agree on the fact that, I mean, yeah, you're totally right. Like, they're liberal, whatever. But I think, for me, it's just something where I'm like, okay, so I am just going to have to be willing to pay more for this or that. And that's just how it works. Like, I understand for some people it is financial, of like, I just don't have the money, and I understand that. But I think we like we said at the beginning, we've been addicted to cheap stuff for a long time, and we need to get out of that mentality and be willing to be like, okay, if we're going to pay more, we're going to pay more. And yeah, maybe it is a mental thing. Like you said, you get I get the bump from being like, oh, I'm supporting a local whatever that is doing good things. So maybe that'll be a thing of like, hey, yeah, this phone cost a couple $100 more, but it was produced here in the U.S. And I don't think...
And you're getting increased, what's the good brand goodwill? Like, I've been seeing a Levi commercial on Hulu, I think is where I've seen it the most, where it's like Jaden Smith talking about, buy higher quality, better things that last longer and buy less of it, which is a real kind of jab on the fast fashion industry, how much clothing we buy and just throw away as the trends move through, or just how cheap it's manufactured.
Well, you and I are guys, we just wear stuff till it literally falls to threads around us. We're like, oh man, I can see daylight through this shirt. I'm going to have to get a new shirt. Like
You and I do.
Yeah,
that doesn't necessarily mean that we are the norm. That's a
you're
changing
a
stereotype.
If you're a real fashion person, you're on, like with everything else, you're on the cutting edge. If it's tech or whatever, you know what I mean? Like it's anything. I think that so I think we both come to agreement that we just need to be willing to pay more for stuff, and if we're willing to do that, then I mean, that's just how things work now. So
And the process of incentivizing that, I think, is pretty strongly agreed upon. Now, ultimately, there's going to be a lot of fighting over how we do that. Do we do it through tax incentives? Do we do it through direct grants? Do we do it through a combination of that and tariffs on foreign trade? Do we give corporate tax breaks to manufacturers that build their plants here in the United States? Like, we had an Intel plant in DuPont for years.
Didn't they move?
They closed.
Oh, that's right.
I think.
Yeah,
they did.
I mean, yeah.
And yet, I remember when we graduated from high school, they were just opening that up, and that was kind of one of those like, hey, go get a job at the Intel plant.
Yeah, I remember that too.
Yeah.
So, any final thoughts on them?
I think it's going to be a really interesting couple of years as this sort of fleshes out, and it's going to be true not just in semiconductors, chips. It's going to be true in other areas, but the car industry is going to be really tough for a while.
Well, I can only afford used anyway, so the one that I want to buy is on the lot. Like, it's just sitting there, you know, like.
Well, and as an example, so what's one of the big industries that everyone wants to come back? Travel.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like people are starting to travel again. That's great. Well, the chip shortage has a massive impact on travel because of rental vehicles. Lisa and I got to Dallas, and the rental desk had 3 cars left. And because the rental company we rented from shared a pool of vehicles with another rental company, the other rental company rented out the first car that our rental company rented
So you
us.
really only had a choice between A and B.
No, it was 3 after that one car was rented out, and we went back, and it was totally different than what we reserved. We had reserved like a small compact. Actually, what we tried to reserve was a Kia Soul because Lisa has a Soul, and that way she'd be comfortable driving in the vehicle. We were going to end up getting a Corolla, and we got back, and they're like, "Hey, you can have a Toyota Tacoma, a Ford Ranger, or a Ford Mustang." Like, totally not related in any way, shape, or form. Those were the 3 vehicle choices that we had. So, like, our choices were extremely limited. And then, like I said, going to Idaho, Boise, Idaho, it was $160 a day to rent a vehicle. So, you know what we did? We're just not going to rent a car. Mom, can you pick us up at the airport?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah,
And-
I would have done that.
So it's going to play out super interesting. I do think it won't be a long-term impact, but we're definitely going to feel it for 6 months to a year while everything
a
ramps
year,
up
yeah.
and gets back in. I think it's completely correct where they're saying, you know, we're going to start feeling this in consoles through 2022. And what it's going to come down to is prices probably aren't going to go up a whole lot. It's just there's going to be a ton of pent up demand, and people just aren't going to be able to get it. You probably see a lot of scalping of like consoles and
Oh, I mean that already happened. Some guy said he made on the PS5s. He was selling a PS5 for $1,000, so that's double the price basically. And he made like 40 grand in a week. So that shows you how many he was going through in a week. I mean, it's already happening. And anecdotally, like I've looked for the new consoles, but I'm kind of at the point where I'm like, well, when I see one, I'll buy one. But talking to the people that I know that get them in, one of the guys at the stores I go to, he said, I haven't even seen the new Xbox. I've not physically seen it with my eyes. They have the 2 models. He goes, I've seen the cheaper model, but the high-end model, I haven't even seen it. I don't even know if they exist. So it's like everybody keeps talking about the PlayStation 5, but the Xbox is also hard to come by. So what I'll say is I thought about this. I mean, yeah, I pretty much share your thoughts. But just to let people know, I think we're going to do a new segment in the beginning of the show, and I'm springing this on Avin. It seems like every time we come up with an episode, we just did taxes last episode. It seems like a week after that or 2 weeks after that, a big news story breaks about taxes, and we can't wheel it. We can't, churn it into the episode. And so what I think we'll do is like maybe a required reading or an addendum to maybe the last month's episode, because there was a tax plan, an article from ProPublica about tax rates in the rich. And that came out post our episode. So maybe if something comes up about the semiconductor thing, we'll talk about it next episode. Like, hey, just read this, and maybe we'll recap it a little bit and roll that into the episode, just maybe for the first couple minutes. Avin and I tend to ramble, but I think
I was just about to say, do you think we'll keep it to a couple minutes, Joe?
No, but yeah. So, but I want to do that because it seems like whenever we go over a topic, I'm like, man, this broke right after the episode, as with every form of media, I think. But You just do that in the beginning of the episode, and then yeah. So, what is the next topic? A surprise, Evan, or are you going to talk about what it is, or are you going to spring it on us next month, I should say?
Next month. I've got a couple of ideas, but I want to talk to you about them before.
Okay. That's fair.
Before we go into it, yeah.
That's fine. Anything you want to plug before we jet out of here?
Well, I mean, as always, I'll just plug my own business, Your Agent Guide.
Do it.
We match people up with talented professional real estate agents in their area. And then here in Snohomish County, I also do help people with purchasing and selling homes in this particular market. It is extremely competitive and very important that people have as much help as they can get, or just a ton of cash.
Yeah, and right now I'm looking like the bad neighbor because my neighbors around me have edged the sidewalk to their, and I have not. So it looks like I have this disheveled, disgusting.
You're bringing everyone's housing value down.
It looks bad because there's for sale signs too on those houses, and it's all edged and it stops right at my property line, which I'm like, they must look over here and be like, oh, those animals over there that haven't edged their sidewalk. That's terrible.
Yeah, is there come in and do tours and they're like, oh, that neighbor.
That's the neighbor. Is there any website or anything you want to?
Your Agent Guide, all one word, .com.
There you go. Yeah, me. I just do the other podcasts I do by myself called, well, mostly by myself. I guess on every once in a while. Gamingwithgrief.com. It hits my website of the same name, gamingwithgrief.com. Monday morning at 7 a.m. Go there, leave a comment. I'm on iTunes and the Google Play Store. Leave a comment, all that kind of stuff. If you like games, and it's usually just me ranting into a mic for about a half hour, talking about grief and gaming and stuff like that. And but I'm having more guests on and stuff like that. So I just hit episode 109. I finished recording that this morning. So yeah, go there if you like gaming stuff and hear me again rant into a mic. I'll probably have to have Avin back on because you're gonna teach me how to play Catan, which I'm kind of excited about.
Good game.
To be ruthless. And as a gaming thing for you, before we leave, Age of Empires 4 is coming out for PC. They're redoing it. So I know you want to beat my butt in a strategy game. You've been threatening me for years. So maybe we hook up on PC and you beat my butt, and maybe I'll have you on the podcast while you dance over my digital dead corpse and talk about how great it was to beat whatever empire I was and how you were victorious, because you always are very good at strategy games. And
Age of Empires was one of my all-time favorites.
Did you hear it was coming out? I need to check the release date, but I will have it on Game Pass, I think, when it comes out. But yeah. So yeah, everybody have a good month. We will talk to you again next month. And again, if you want to reach us, go to gwgpodfellows@gmail.com. Just leave the episode information and what you want to talk about. And that'd be great. We don't have any mail yet, but we will soon. So anything else happen before we leave?
Nothing else I can think of.
Cool. Well, everybody have a good month, and we will talk to you next month. Bye.
Bye.